A scream pierces the laughter of a grand fete. What begins as a playful murder mystery game spirals into a deadly truth. When the curtains fall, a body lies still, and Miss Jane Marple's keen eyes see beyond the masquerade. Who turned a charade into a chilling crime? And what hidden grudges lurk beneath the polite smiles of Gossington Hall? Chapter 1. The Village Fete's Whimsical Masquerade. The sun draped St. Mary Mead in a golden shawl, its rays glinting off the cobblestones and coaxing the scent of lavender from cottage gardens. It was a day that felt like a gift, the kind where the world seemed to pause for breath, inviting villagers to linger over tea and gossip. Miss Jane Marple, her tweed skirt whispering against her sensible shoes, stepped off the rattling train at the village station. Her basket, brimming with skeins of pale blue wool and a half-finished scarf, swung lightly from her arm. At 70-odd years, her posture was upright, her gaze as piercing as a winter frost, taking in every detail. The porter's hasty shuffle, the sparrow darting beneath the eaves, the faint smudge of lipstick on a discarded cigarette butt. An invitation from Lady Beatrice Bantry, a friend whose flair for the dramatic was as renowned as her sprawling estate, had lured her to Gossington Hall for the annual summer fete. This year, the whispers promised something extraordinary, a game called The Fatal Riddle, a charades-inspired murder mystery that had the village abuzz with anticipation. A horse-drawn carriage, polished to a gleam, awaited her, driven by Tommy Pierce, a lanky lad with a grin as wide as the meadow. "Miss Marple, ma'am, Lady Beatrice says you're to be pampered today," he chirped, tipping his cap as he helped her into the cushioned seat. His enthusiasm was infectious, though Miss Marple noted the faint tremor in his hands. Nerves, perhaps, or the weight of some untold mischief. "Tell me, Tommy," she said, her voice soft as a lullaby, "what's this fatal riddle all about?" Tommy's eyes sparkled. "Oh, it's grand, miss. Everyone gets a role, dukes, maids, villains, and you act out a murder, all pretend-like. There's clues and secrets, and someone's got to guess the killer by supper." Miss Marple nodded, her lips twitching. A game of deception in a village where secrets festered like weeds. She could already sense the day's potential for revelations. The carriage rolled through St. Mary Mead's lanes, past ivy-clad cottages, and the vicarage where Reverend Clement was pruning roses with ecclesiastical precision. Gossington Hall loomed ahead, its Georgian facade softened by climbing wisteria. The fete was in full swing. Children darted through a croquet match, their laughter mingling with the clink of teacups and the hum of a string quartet. Tents dotted the lawn, offering homemade jams, embroidered linens, and a fortune-teller draped in questionable silks. Miss Marple alighted, smoothing her skirt, and was promptly enveloped by Lady Beatrice, a vision in emerald chiffon, her auburn curls barely tamed by a wide-brimmed hat. "Jane, darling!" she exclaimed, her voice carrying over the crowd. "You're just in time for the fun! Come, you must join the fatal riddle!" Miss Marple demurred, citing her knitting, but Beatrice's insistence was a force of nature. "Nonsense! You'll be our sage observer. No one sees through people like you." They settled beneath a marquee, where a trestle table groaned on scones, cucumber sandwiches, and a silver urn dispensing tea as dark as gossip. The players gathered, a motley crew of villagers and Beatrice's eclectic guests. There was Mr. Leopold Hargrove, an artist with a waxed mustache and a penchant for florid waistcoats, sketching caricatures on a napkin. Mrs. Agatha Pettigrew, a widow with a pinched mouth and eyes like gimlets, clutched the lace handkerchief as if it were a lifeline.
Young Clara Duval, the vicar's niece, fluttered about in a frock the color of primroses, her giggles betraying a nervous edge. And then there was Dr. Simon Quill, a retired surgeon with a hawkish nose and a habit of tapping his cane, who seemed to regard the festivities with clinical detachment. Beatrice clapped her hands, silencing the chatter. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the fatal riddle. Each of you has a role. Check your envelopes. One of you is the victim, one the murderer, and the rest are suspects or sleuths. Act your part, drop your clues, and let's unravel the mystery by dusk." Envelopes were distributed, each sealed with crimson wax. Miss Marple, spared a role but given a consulting detective badge, tucked herself into a wicker chair, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. She watched as Clara, assigned the role of Countess Valentina, swooned theatrically, fanning herself with a peacock feather. Hargrove, playing a disgraced baronet, swaggered about, accusing everyone of stealing his imaginary fortune. Mrs. Agatha Pettigrew, cast as a scheming governess, muttered cryptic lines about hidden letters, her delivery stilted but oddly intense. Dr. Quill, the shady apothecary, dispensed poison in the form of lemonade, winking at the giggling onlookers. The game's first act unfolded during high tea, with the victim, a portly squire named Mr. Babcock, collapsing dramatically after sipping his tainted tea. The crowd roared with laughter as he flopped onto the grass, clutching his chest and rolling his eyes heavenward.
Miss Marple's needles paused as she studied the scene. Mr. Babcock's performance was convincing, but she noted the way his fingers lingered on his cup, as if reluctant to release it. Clara's laughter rang a touch too shrill, and Hargrove's jests carried a barbed edge, especially when aimed at Mrs. Pettigrew, who flushed crimson. Beatrice, orchestrating the chaos, seemed oblivious to these undercurrents, her laughter bright as the bunting overhead. Yet, as the quartet struck up a waltz and the players scattered to mingle, Miss Marple caught a fleeting exchange. Mrs. Pettigrew, hovering near the tea-urn, whispered sharply to Hargrove, who brushed her off with a sneer. "You'll regret that, Leopold," she hissed, her voice barely audible over the music. Miss Marple's lips pursed. In her experience, words spoken in jest often masked truths too raw for daylight. The afternoon drifted on, the game weaving through the fête's delights. Children queued for pony rides, their squeals echoing as Clara, still in character, led a group to the croquet lawn to search for the stolen jewels. Miss Marple followed at a leisurely pace, her basket swinging, her eyes catching the glint of a dropped cufflink near the marquee. It was silver, engraved with an ornate H, Hargrove's, no doubt. She pocketed it, her mind cataloging the players' movements. At the lemonade stand, Dr. Quill was deep in conversation with a young footman, their heads bent close, the doctor's cane tapping an impatient rhythm. Clara, meanwhile, seemed to tire of her countess role, her smiles fading as she glanced repeatedly toward the hall's upper windows, where a curtain twitched. Miss Marple filed this away, her needles resuming their dance. As the sun dipped, painting the sky in hues of apricot and rose, Beatrice gathered the players for the game's second act, a mock trial in the rose garden. The suspects lined up, each delivering alibis laced with theatrical flair. Hargrove accused Clara of slipping poison into the squire's tea, earning a gasp and a playful shove. Mrs. Pettigrew, her voice tight, claimed she'd been cataloging manuscripts in the library, a lie so blatant Miss Marple's eyebrows rose. Dr. Quill, with a dry chuckle, admitted to dabbling in potions, but swore his lemonade was harmless. The crowd voted, fingers pointing at Clara, who dissolved into giggles as Beatrice declared her guilty and sentenced her to dance with the vicar. The laughter was infectious, but Miss Marple's gaze lingered on Beatrice. Her friend's smile was radiant, yet her hands twisted the hem of her shawl, a gesture Miss Marple recognized from years past,
a sign of unease, like a crack in fine porcelain. The quartet played on, and the fete wound down with villagers drifting toward the cake stall, where Mrs. Bunce's lemon drizzle was vanishing fast. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind sifting through the day's tapestry, the cuff-link, the whispered spat, Clara's anxious glances, Beatrice's fidgeting hands. The fatal riddle was a delightful lark, but St. Mary Mead was no stranger to shadows beneath the surface. She recalled a similar game years ago at a church bazaar, where a jest about stolen silver had unraveled a theft long buried. As Tommy Pierce helped her back into the carriage, his chatter about the murder still bubbling, Miss Marple smiled faintly. "A splendid day, Tommy," she said, her voice warm, but her eyes distant. The fat had ended in laughter, the game's first act a triumph of whimsy. Yet as the carriage rolled toward her cottage, the setting sun cast long shadows across the lane, and Miss Marple felt the prickle of something amiss, a riddle not yet solved, a masquerade with a hint of truth.
Chapter 2. Whispers Behind the Garden Hedge. Dawn broke over St. Mary Mead like a soft promise, painting the thatched roofs with a blush of rose and amber. Miss Jane Marple rose early, her cottage bedroom aglow with the first light filtering through lace curtains. The previous day's fete at Gossington Hall lingered in her thoughts. The laughter of the fatal riddle, the glint of a silver cufflink now tucked in her sewing box, the sharp edge in Mrs. Pettigrew's whispered barb to Mr. Hargrove. Sleep had been a restless guest, her dreams tangled with images of envelopes passed in shadow. A note from Lady Beatrice, slipped under her door by a yawning village lad, beckoned her back. "Jane, the game blooms anew. A garden scavenger hunt at 10. Clues hide among my roses. Join us." She dressed in a lavender frock, pinned a cameo to her collar, and breakfasted on toast with marmalade, her tea robust enough to stir the senses. Her notebook, scribbled with yesterday's observations, Clara's flinches, Quill's cane, Pettigrew's spite, nestled in her basket beside her knitting. By 9:30, Miss Marple was striding toward Gossington Hall, her brogue soft on the dew-damp lane. The village hummed with morning vigor. Mrs. Bunce swept her bakery stoop, her broom a metronome, while the blacksmith's hammer rang like a distant bell. The hall's gardens unfurled in a tapestry of color, lupins swaying, bees weaving through honeysuckle. Servants bustled, setting out wicker chairs and trays of iced lemonade under a striped marquee. Lady Beatrice, radiant in a gown of periwinkle muslin, greeted her with a flourish. "Jane, my sleuthing savior, the fatal riddle turns scavenger today. Clues strewn across the grounds leading to a grand reveal. You'll watch for cheaters, won't you?" Miss Marple's smile was demure, her eyes already scanning the assembling players. "I'll keep one eye on my knitting and the other on mischief, Beatrice." The group was a familiar mix, spiced with new faces drawn by the fete's allure. Mr. Leopold Hargrove, the artist, leaned against a trellis, his cravat loose, sketching a spray of clematis with ostentatious flair. Mrs. Agatha Pettigrew, in a severe black dress, clutched a fan like a weapon, her gaze darting as if tallying enemies. Clara Duval, the vicar's niece, twirled a parasol, her peach frock a contrast to the shadows under her eyes. Dr. Simon Quill, cane in hand, surveyed the scene with a surgeon's detachment, his satchel burgeoning with vials labeled tonics. A newcomer, Miss Lydia Finch, a botanist with a sharp chin and sharper wit, joined the fray, her notebook bristling with pressed leaves. Beatrice handed out scrolls, each sealed with a wax ivy leaf. "Your mission? Hunt the clues. They're hidden in nooks, fountains, arbors, statues. Pair up, stay in character, and find the murderer's motive by noon." Miss Marple, exempt from the chase but tasked with observing, settled on a bench near a fountain where marble cherubs spouted crystal arcs. The first riddle, "Where wings guard the heart's desire, seek the knot that binds the fire," sent pairs scattering.
Clara, playing the wayward heiress, partnered with Lydia, the cryptic scholar, and darted toward the dovecote, where a clue dangled from a pigeon's perch. Hargrove, cast as the scheming collector, partnered with Quill, the alchemist of secrets, and made for the topiary maze, their banter laced with barbs. Pettigrew, the widow of whispers, strode alone, insisting her role demanded solitude, her fan slicing the air. Miss Marple's needles clicked as she watched Hargrove pause at a lavender border, his pencil hovering, his eyes fixed on Pettigrew's retreating back. A memory surfaced, yesterday's spat, words of inheritance and betrayal. Her pencil scratched a note. Hargrove watches too closely. The hunt wove through the garden's delights, a pergola draped in wisteria, a pond where lilies floated like forgotten promises. At a stone bench carved with ivy, Clara unearthed a clue, a locket etched with a rose containing a scrap reading, "To where the hours bloom and fade." She giggled, nudging Lydia. "The rose garden, surely." But as they hurried off, Miss Marple caught Clara's backward glance, not at the path, but at a gardener trimming hedges, his cap pulled low. The man's hands faltered, a pruning shear glinting oddly sharp for such work. Miss Marple's brow furrowed. Props and players blurred too easily today. In the rose garden, a trellis heavy with crimson blooms hid the next prize. A brass key, its bow shaped like a serpent's head, tucked in a velvet pouch. Hargrove reached it first, snatching it from Quill's grasp with a crow of triumph. "Mine, Doctor! The collector claims his due!" Quill's smile was thin. "Careful, Leopold. Keys unlock more than doors. Sometimes they open graves." The jest drew a chuckle, but Miss Marple, approaching to admire a nearby bloom, noted the key's weight as Hargrove cast it to her for inspection. "A fine prop," she said mildly, turning it. The metal was cold, its edges too precise for theater. From Beatrice's collection, no doubt. Hargrove shrugged, his mustache twitching. "Some attic relic, I'd wager. Fits the part. Unlocks the killer's lair, or so the riddle says." She returned it, pocketing a stray petal that clung to her sleeve, its scent faintly bitter.
The hunt pressed on, riddles leading to a sunken garden where a statue of Pan played a silent flute. Here, Pettigrew lingered, her fan tracing the statue's curves as if decoding a cipher. Miss Marple, pausing to adjust her hat, overheard her muttering, "Late husband, perhaps, or a figure tying her to Hargrove's taunts." Before Miss Marple could approach, a shout rang out from the maze's heart where Clara and Lydia had stumbled on a blood-stained kerchief. Red dye on linen, part of the game. Clara's laughter was high, almost frantic, as she waved it aloft. "The murderer's mark! Oh, Lydia, we're close!" Lydia's response was a dry chuckle. "Close to a headache, child. These clues are botanical nonsense. Bleeding hearts don't grow in mazes." Miss Marple noted Lydia's scrutiny of Clara, sharp as a specimen pin. A bell chimed 11, summoning the players to a shaded grove for refreshments, sherbet ices and cucumber sandwiches served on silver trays. Beatrice flitted among the group, her laughter a bright thread, but Miss Marple caught her hostess's fleeting frown as she glanced at Pettigrew, now deep in conversation with Quill. "A matter of honor, Doctor," Pettigrew was saying, her voice low. "Reginald's will was tempered with, Hargrove's doing. I'd stake my widow's pension." Quill's cane tapped the grass. "Old wounds, Agatha. Let the dead rest, or you'll stir ghosts best left sleeping." Miss Marple, nibbling a sandwich, filed the exchange away. Tampered wills, contested estates, motive enough for more than play acting. The hunt resumed, the next clue pointing to a grotto where a mossy fountain trickled like whispered secrets. Hargrove and Quill, now at odds, arrived simultaneously, their hands colliding over a sealed scroll wedged in a crevice. "Hands off, Sawbones," Hargrove growled, yanking it free. Quill's eyes narrowed. "You're too eager, Leopold. That key, planning to unlock more than the game's end." The accusation hung, Hargrove's face flushing as he tore open the scroll. "To the glass house where secrets bloom," he read, stalking toward the conservatory. Miss Marple followed at a distance, her basket swinging, her thoughts on the key's serpent motif. She recalled a village tale of Reginald Pettigrew, a collector of curios, whose estate had sparked a feud after his death. Had Hargrove's collection included forged documents? The conservatory loomed, its glass panes glinting like a dragon's scales, the air inside thick with the scent of ferns and tuberose. The final clue, a crystal vial, stoppered with cork, labeled "Essence of Betrayal," rested on a wrought-iron table. Clara reached it first, her fingers trembling as she lifted it. "Poison," she squeaked, playing her role to the hilt. "The heiress escapes, but the killer strikes." Beatrice, arriving breathless, clapped her hands. "Bravo! Now pool your finds. Key, kerchief, vial, and name the fiend." The group huddled, voices overlapping. The kerchief pointed to Quill, the key to Hargrove, the vial to Pettigrew. Laughter bubbled as accusations flew, but Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the vial. She uncorked it discreetly, inhaling a whiff, not sugar syrup, but something sharp, like crushed almonds and wilted violets. A prop surely, but too convincing for comfort. The debate was cut short by a cry, not staged, but raw, slicing through the humid air. It came from the grotto, where the gardener Miss Marple had noticed earlier now knelt, his cap askew, cradling Clara's parasol. "Miss Duval, she's fainted," he called, his voice cracking. The players rushed back, finding Clara crumpled on the moss, her face pale as moonlight, her breath shallow. Beatrice gasped, fanning her with a program. "Clara, darling!" Miss Marple knelt, her fingers finding a pulse, weak but steady. "Water, quickly," she said, her tone calm but commanding. Lydia dashed to the fountain, returning with a damp cloth, while Quill produced a vial from his satchel. "Smelling salts," he claimed, though Miss Marple noted its label matched the poison prop. Clara stirred, blinking up at the concerned faces. I tripped, that's all. The heat, the running." Her voice wavered, and Miss Marple patted her hand. "Rest, my dear. Games can be taxing." The group retreated to the marquee, where Beatrice insisted on tea to soothe rattled nerves. Clara, propped on a chaise lounge, sipped chamomile, her color returning. Hargrove sketched the scene with a smirk, muttering about delicate constitutions. Pettigrew, seated apart, fanned herself vigorously, her eyes locked on Clara with an intensity Miss Marple found unsettling. Quill, ever the physician, hovered, his cane tapping a restless rhythm. "No harm done," he assured Beatrice, but his glance at Miss Marple was guarded. She smiled benignly, her mind cataloguing the key's heft, the vial's sting, Pettigrew's fixation, Clara's fear. Over tea, she drew Beatrice aside. "Your gardener, new, isn't he?" seemed agitated. Beatrice frowned. "Tompkins? Hired last week. Bit of a loner, but skilled. Why?" Miss Marple's response was vague, her thoughts on the shear's gleam. Luncheon followed, a spread of cold pheasant and gooseberry fool under the oaks. Conversation turned to the hunt's theatrics, but Miss Marple steered it gently. "Miss Finch, your botanical knowledge, any plants here mimic poison?" Lydia's eyes gleamed.
"Oh, plenty. Foxglove, hemlock. But that vial, just colored water, I'd guess. Though," she hesitated, glancing at Quill, who changed the subject with a tale of a patient cured by nettle tea. Clara, revived, whispered to Miss Marple, "I saw Tompkins arguing with Hargrove this morning, something about a debt. He looked ready to strike." Miss Marple's pencil paused. Debts, like secrets, multiply in shadow. As the sun climbed, the party drifted to lighter games, quoits and shuttlecock on the lawn. Miss Marple lingered, her knitting a pretext, as she watched Tompkins rake leaves with furious energy. Approaching casually, she remarked on the roses. "Fine work, Mr. Tompkins. You've had a history with gardens?" His nod was curt. "Family trade, ma'am. Worked estates up north, till debts drove me south." His eyes flicked toward Hargrove, laughing with Lydia. Miss Marple's smile was warm, but her mind raced. Debts, daggers, disputed wills. The game's clues were props, but the players' grudges were real. Beatrice declared the hunt a triumph, dismissing the group with promises of a midnight charade. Miss Marple, pleading a headache, accepted a ride from Tommy Pierce, whose chatter filled the carriage. "That fainting spell shook us, miss. Clara's all right, but folk are jumpy. Heard Hargrove muttering about a lawyer's letter. Big money, he says." Miss Marple nodded, her notebook open. "Money stirs trouble, Tommy. Keep your ears sharp." As the hall faded behind them, the village settling into its evening hush, she reviewed the day. The key's serpent, the vial's sting, Clara's collapse, Tompkins' rage. The hunt had ended in laughter, the scream a fleeting alarm, but the threads of discord wove a pattern only half seen. Tomorrow's charade loomed, a stage for truths to slip their masks.
Chapter 3. The Midnight Charade's Dark Turn. The evening air draped St. Mary Mead in a velvet hush, the stars pricking the sky like scattered diamonds. Miss Jane Marple sat by her cottage hearth, the fire's glow dancing on her knitting needles as they wove a scarf in soft heathery wool. The day's garden hunt lingered in her mind, the serpent-headed key's unsettling weight, the bitter whiff of the poison vial, Clara's collapse by the grotto, and the gardener Tompkins's veiled rancor toward Hargrove. Her notebook, open on the side table, bore fresh entries. Pettigrew's grudge, Reginald's will, Tompkins, debts or deeper ties. A second note from Lady Beatrice had arrived at dusk, its ink still fragrant. "Jane, the game escalates. Join us at midnight for a charade in the ballroom. Candlelit intrigue awaits. Don't fail me." The invitation's exuberance felt forced, a mask over some unspoken tremor. Miss Marple donned a shawl of midnight blue, her brooch glinting like a watchful eye, and set out, her steps brisk despite the hour. Gossington Hall glowed against the night, its windows spilling amber light onto the lawns. A footman ushered her through the oak-panelled foyer, where chandeliers cast prisms on the walls, to the ballroom, a cavern of polished parquet and damask drapes, lit by candelabras that flickered like conspirators. The air was heavy with wax and tuberose, the quartet's absence leaving only the rustle of silk and the murmur of anticipation. Beatrice, resplendent in sapphire velvet, greeted her with a clasp of hands. "Jane, you're my anchor. Tonight, the fatal riddle becomes a charade. Each player enacts a scene, dropping clues to unmask the killer. You'll judge the truth in their lies, yes?" Miss Marple's smile was a gentle shield. "I'll watch closely, Beatrice. Games reveal more than their players intend." The players gathered, their costumes bolder under the candlelight's spell. Mr. Leopold Hargrove, now a disgraced diplomat, sported a crimson sash and a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Agatha Pettigrew, the veiled conspirator, wore a lace mantilla that shadowed her sharp features, her fingers twisting a rosary of jet beads.
Clara Duval, the orphaned heiress, shimmered in ivory satin, her curls pinned with pearls, though her hands fluttered like trapped moths. Dr. Simon Quill, the sinister apothecary, leaned on his cane, his black coat blending with the gloom, a vial glinting in his pocket. Miss Lydia Finch, the botanist, joined as a herbal mystic, her green shawl embroidered with ferns, her gaze dissecting the room. A new figure, Mr. Victor Crane, a solicitor with a reedy voice and a briefcase clutched like a talisman, had been roped in by Beatrice to play the corrupt magistrate. The group buzzed, their roles fueling whispered jests and sidelong glances. Beatrice clapped, her rings flashing. "Welcome to the midnight charade. Each of you has a scene. Improvise, accuse, deceive. Plant your clues, but beware, the murderer walks among us. By the stroke of 12, name your suspect." She handed out velvet pouches, each containing a script fragment, lines to weave into the performance. Miss Marple settled in an alcove, her knitting a soft rhythm, her eyes missing nothing. The ballroom dimmed, candles casting long shadows as the first scene unfolded. Clara, trembling theatrically, pleaded for sanctuary from an unseen pursuer, her pearl comb slipping to the floor as a clue. Hargrove followed, his diplomat railing against a stolen treaty, accusing Pettigrew of betrayal with a flourish of his sash. Pettigrew's response was icy, her conspirator confessing to forging letters to ruin a rival, her beads clicking like a countdown. Miss Marple's needles paused as she caught a thread of truth in the fiction. Clara's plea echoed her earlier unease, Hargrove's accusations mirrored his garden spat, and Pettigrew's forged letters hinted at the contested will. Quill's scene was next, his apothecary mixing a fatal draught with a theatrical cackle, spilling a drop of red liquid, wine surely, onto the parquet. Lydia, as the mystic, chanted over a bowl of dried herbs, her words about roots of vengeance carrying a weight that silenced the room. Crane, stumbling through his magistrate's speech, dropped a propret that fluttered near Miss Marple's feet. She retrieved it, noting its wax seal, a serpent like the key from the hunt. Her fingers brushed a folded note tucked inside, its ink fresh. "Meet me at the alcove, midnight. L.H. Hargrove's initials, perhaps."
The charade grew feverish, Claire's weaving in and out of candlelight, their accusations sharper. Clara, flushed, accused Quill of poisoning her inheritance, her voice cracking on the word. Quill retorted with a jab at Hargrove's diplomatic immunity, hinting at bribes. Pettigrew, her mantilla slipping, pointed at Lydia, claiming her herbs masked treachery. Miss Marple's gaze darted. Clara's comb, now in Beatrice's hand, bore a scratched initial. R. Reginald, again? The ballroom's heat thickened, the air electric with pretense and something darker. Beatrice, sensing the mood, announced a twist. A blackout. When the candles dim, the murder strikes. Find your mark and let chaos reign. The players laughed, but Miss Marple's spine stiffened. Blackouts invited more than play. At 11:50, the candelabras were hooded, plunging the room into shadow save for a single taper by the door. Whispers and giggles filled the void. Clara's squeak, Hargrove's mock groan, Pettigrew's hiss of "mind your step." Miss Marple clutched her basket, her ears straining. A rustle, a muffled thud, then silence. The taper flared as Beatrice relit the candles, revealing the players frozen in tableau, Clara clutching Lydia, Quill leaning on his cane, Crane fumbling his briefcase. But Hargrove, where was Hargrove? A gasp rose as eyes turned to the center of the room. There, sprawled on the Persian rug, lay Leopold Hargrove, his crimson sash askew, a dark stain blooming across his waistcoat. His eyes stared blankly, his mustache still, a prop dagger, the same from the hunt, jutting from his chest. The room erupted. Clara screamed, a raw edge to her cry, while Pettigrew's beads scattered like hail. Beatrice, pale, rushed forward, her hands hovering over Hargrove. "Leopold, it's the game! Say it's the game!" Miss Marple was at his side in an instant, her finger seeking a pulse. None. The blood was real, warm and sticky, the dagger's blade no longer blunt. "Beatrice," she said, her voice steady as granite, "send for Inspector Craddock. This is no charade." The footman bolted, and the players recoiled, their faces a gallery of shock. Clara trembling, Quill's cane frozen mid-tap, Lydia's eyes wide behind her spectacles. Crane dropped his briefcase, papers spilling like confessions. Pettigrew alone stood rigid, her mantilla a shroud, her lips parted but silent. Miss Marple rose, her shawl slipping, and surveyed the scene. The dagger's hilt bore the same serpent motif, its ruby bead missing, matching the one in her pocket. She scanned the rug. A woman's glove, black velvet, lay crumpled near Hargrove's hand. Pettigrew's, or Clara's, discarded in panic. Beatrice, trembling, clutched Miss Marple's arm. "Jane, how? It was meant to be fun." Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind racing. "Fun can turn fatal, dear. Someone seized the moment." She bent, retrieving the glove. It scent faintly of lavender, Pettigrew's perfume. Her notebook would gain a new entry, but first order must prevail. As the clock struck 12, the players were herded to the drawing-room, their voices a cacophony of fear and denial. Clara sobbed into Lydia's shoulder, murmuring about cursed games. Quill, his face ashen, muttered about surgical precision in the wound. Crane babbled about legal liability, his briefcase forgotten. Pettigrew, seated apart, clutched her rosary, her eyes darting to the door. Miss Marple, stationed by the hearth, directed the footman to guard the ballroom until the police arrived. Beatrice, rallying, offered brandy to steady nerves, but the air remained taut, the candlelight now a mockery of festivity. Inspector Craddock arrived within an hour, his face grim under his trilby, his notebook already open. "Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat, "trouble finds you, doesn't it?" She inclined her head. "Or I find it, Inspector. Mr. Hargrove's death is no accident. The dagger, used in today's hunt, was tampered with. And this glove—" She held it aloft, its velvet catching the firelight. Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Yours, Mrs. Pettigrew." The widow flinched, her beads clicking. I lost it earlier. Anyone could have picked it up." Her voice was a thread, fraying under scrutiny. Craddock's men cordoned the ballroom, and Miss Marple slipped him the note from the writ. "L.H. midnight. Found with Mr. Crane's prop," she murmured. "Hargrove planned a rendezvous, perhaps." The inspector questioned each player, their alibis crumbling like dry scones. Clara claimed she had been near the door, clinging to Lydia during the blackout. Lydia confirmed it, but her hesitation suggested gaps. Quill swore he had tripped over his cane, nowhere near Hargrove. Crane stammered about retrieving his papers, blind in the dark. Pettigrew insisted she had been by the window, fanning herself. Miss Marple listened, her knitting resumed, her mind weaving, the note's timing, the glove's scent, the dagger's edge. She recalled Hargrove's taunts about a will, Pettigrew's fury, Clara's fear of debts, and Quill. His vial matched the hunt's poison, its scent lingering in her memory. As Craddock's men photographed the scene, Miss Marple wandered the ballroom's edge, her eyes catching a glint beneath the curtain, a cufflink, twin to yesterday's, engraved with H. Hargrove's dropped in haste or planted. She pocketed it, her thoughts on the note's alcove. Empty now, but a smudge of wax on the sill suggested a candle snuffed in a hurry. Beatrice, hovering, whispered, "Jane, this is madness. Leopold was a rogue, but murdered." Miss Marple's gaze softened. "Rogues stir passions, dear. Someone turned the game script to their own ends." She recalled a village dance years ago, where a stolen glance had sparked a feud that ended in a brawl. Games, like dances, could unmask the heart. The night stretched.
Craddock's questions yielded little but contradictions. Miss Marple, excused from formal grilling, lingered by the drawing-room's bay window, her silhouette small against the moonlit panes. Clara approached, her face tear-streaked. "Miss Marple, I saw Hargrove earlier arguing with Tompkins by the stables. Something about a loan, unpaid. Tompkins looked murderous." Miss Marple nodded, her pencil scribbling. "Thank you, Clara. Every thread helps." The girl retreated, and Miss Marple turned to Lydia, who hovered nearby. "Miss Finch, your herbs. Any in that bowl mimic cyanide scent." Lydia's lips pursed. "Possibly. Bitter almond from peach pits. But I'd need to test." Her voice trailed off, her eyes on Quill's satchel. As the clock chimed 2, Craddock released the players to their rooms, the hall under guard. Miss Marple, escorted home by a constable, sat in her carriage, the glove and cufflink heavy in her pocket. The charade had ended in chaos, Hargrove's death a brutal punctuation, yet the night's horror brought clarity. The dagger's tampering, the note's summons, the glove's owner, all pieces of a puzzle half-formed. St. Mary Mead slept, its quiet a fragile veneer. Miss Marple's resolve burned steady, a beacon against the dark. Tomorrow she would unravel the threads, but for now the game's fatal turn lay resolved in grim certainty, the ballroom shadows holding their secrets close.
Chapter 4. Threads of Deception Unravel. The dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a tentative glow, as if the sun hesitated to illuminate the shadows cast by the previous night's tragedy. Miss Jane Marple sat at her kitchen table, the kettle's whistle a sharp counterpoint to the quiet of her cottage. Her knitting lay idle, the heathery scarf untouched since the midnight charade's grim finale, Leopold Hargrove's lifeless form on the ballroom rug, the serpent-hilted dagger buried in his chest, the black velvet glove now tucked in her sewing box beside a second cufflink. Her notebook brimmed with jottings: Pettigrew's lavender scent, Quill's vials, Crane's note, L.H., midnight. The air held a chill, not of weather but of foreboding, as if Gossington Hall's walls whispered of secrets unburied. A third missive from Lady Beatrice had arrived with the milk cart. "Jane, we're reeling. Join us at noon for luncheon. Craddock's orders. Your clarity is our lifeline." Miss Marple donned a gray cardigan, her brooch a glinting sentinel, and set out, her basket heavy with purpose. Gossington Hall loomed under a sky bruised with clouds, its grandeur muted by the police cordon at the gates. Constables patrolled the drive, their boots crunching gravel, while villagers gathered beyond, their murmurs a low hum of speculation. Miss Marple slipped through, her unassuming air disarming a young officer who waved her past. Inside, the hall felt hollow, the chandeliers dim, the air thick with wax and worry. Beatrice met her in the morning room, her crimson shawl a stark contrast to her pallor. "Jane, thank heaven," she whispered, her hands wringing a lace handkerchief. "Craddock's turned the place upside down. Poor Leopold, murdered under my roof. You'll help, won't you?" Miss Marple's nod was steady. "I'll observe, Beatrice. Truth hides in plain sight if one knows where to look." Inspector Craddock, his trilby askew, presided over the dining hall where a luncheon was laid out: cold beef, pickled onions, and a trembling blancmange untouched by the subdued guests. The players from the charade sat like chess pieces, each in their own square of silence. Clara Duval, in a muted green dress, twisted a napkin, her eyes red-rimmed. Mrs. Agatha Pettigrew, rigid in black bombazine, stared at her plate as if it held omens. Dr. Simon Quill tapped his cane, his face a mask of clinical calm. Miss Lydia Finch scribbled in her notebook, her fern-embroidered shawl slipping. Mr. Victor Crane, the solicitor, shuffled papers nervously, his spectacles fogging. A new figure, Mrs. Evelyn Marsh, a local seamstress playing a grieving cousin in the game, sat quietly, her needlework idle in her lap. Craddock's voice cut through the tension. "Miss Marple, your reputation precedes you. I'll question each in turn, but your insights are welcome." Miss Marple took a corner seat, her knitting resumed as a pretext, her eyes cataloging the room. Craddock began with Clara, whose voice quavered.
I was by the door when the lights went out, Inspector. Lydia held my arm. I swear I didn't move. Lydia nodded, but her fingers tightened on her pen, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. Quill claimed he'd stumbled in the dark, his cane catching on a chair. Crane insisted he'd been groping for his briefcase, blind as a mole. Pettigrew, her voice clipped, said she'd stood by the window fanning herself against the heat. Miss Marple's needles clicked. Alibis were flimsy as tissue, and the glove's lavender scent pointed too neatly to Pettigrew. She recalled the note, L.H., midnight, and Hargrove spat with Pettigrew over a will. Had he lured her to the alcove only to meet his own end? The inspector's questions grew sharper, probing Hargrove's life. Known enemies, he asked Beatrice, who hesitated. Leopold was divisive, a painter with debts, always boasting of a coming windfall, some family estate. He and Pettigrew clashed over it. Pettigrew's head snapped up. Lies! My husband Reginald's will was clear. His estate went to me. Leopold's claims were forgeries, nothing more. Her vehemence drew eyes, and Miss Marple noted Crane's flinch, his papers rustling. Mr. Crane, she said softly, you're a solicitor. Did you know of this will? Crane coughed, adjusting his spectacles. I heard rumors. Hargrove consulted me last month, claiming new evidence, a codicil naming him heir. I advised caution. Such matters are delicate. His voice wavered, and Miss Marple's pencil scratched. Crane. Nervous? Complicit? Lunch dissolved into uneasy murmurs, the blancmange collapsing under its own weight. Miss Marple slipped from the table, her basket in tow, and wandered the hall's corridors, her steps silent on the rugs. In the library, where shelves groaned with leather-bound tomes, she found Tompkins, the gardener, polishing brass fittings, a task ill-suited to his calloused hands. "Morning, ma'am," he grunted, his cap low. "Terrible business, that artist." Miss Marple's smile was disarming. "Indeed, Tompkins. You worked late last night. See anything odd by the stables?" His eyes flicked up, then away. "Just Hargrove, ma'am, pacing after supper, muttering about a letter. Sounded like he'd struck gold. Then he went inside." She nodded, her mind snagging on letter. The note from Crane's prop, perhaps.
Returning to the dining hall, she caught Beatrice directing servants to clear plates. "Jane, you're prowling like a cat. Found anything?" Miss Marple's voice was low. "Threads, Beatrice. Hargrove's windfall, linked to Pettigrew's husband?" Beatrice's eyes widened. "Reginald Pettigrew, yes. Died 5 years ago, left a tidy sum. Agatha inherited, but Leopold claimed half, saying he was Reginald's nephew. The courts dismissed him, lacked proof, but recently he crowed about a new document." Miss Marple's lips pursed. A codicil could shift fortunes and motives. Craddock reconvened the group in the drawing room, its velvet curtains drawn against the noon glare. He held up the dagger, now bagged as evidence. "Tampered with," he said. "The blade was sharpened post-hunt. Who had access?" Silence fell, broken by Quill's dry cough. "It was in the conservatory all day. Anyone could have touched it." Clara's napkin shredded in her hands. "I saw it there, but I swear I didn't—" "Nor I, though I noticed Tompkins lingering nearby, pruning with a blade far too keen for twigs." All eyes turned to the door, where Tompkins had appeared with a tray of tea. He froze, then set it down, his face a mask. "I prune what needs pruning, miss, nothing more." Craddock's gaze hardened, but Miss Marple intervened. "Inspector, might we test a theory? A reenactment of the blackout, here, now." Beatrice gasped, but Craddock nodded, intrigued. "Very well, positions, everyone, as last night." The curtains were drawn tighter, lamps dimmed to mimic the candelabra's flicker. Miss Marple, stationed by the hearth, directed the players to their claimed spots, Clara and Lydia by the door, Quill near a sofa, Crane by a table, Pettigrew at the window. Tompkins was dismissed to the hall, his scowl lingering. "Lights out," Miss Marple said, and Beatrice doused the lamps, plunging the room into gloom. Shuffles and whispers filled the dark, Clara's gasp, Quill's cane tapping, Crane's papers rustling.
Miss Marple, her eyes adjusted, caught a silhouette move toward the center, swift and silent. When Beatrice relit the lamps, all were in place, but a chair had shifted, its leg grazing a rug's edge. Craddock pounced. Someone moved. Who? Denials flew, but Miss Marple's voice cut through. The chair, Inspector. It's by the alcove, where Hargrove's note suggested a meeting. She produced the slip, L.H. midnight, and Craddock's eyes narrowed. Crane, this was in your prop. Explain. The solicitor blanched. I found it in my briefcase yesterday. Hargrove must have slipped it in, planning a rendezvous. I knew nothing of murder. Pettigrew's beads clicked furiously. He lured me then, knew I'd confront him about the codicil. Her outburst drew gasps, and Miss Marple's needles paused. Mrs. Pettigrew, you met him in the alcove? Pettigrew faltered. No, I intended to, but the blackout. I stayed put. The reenactment yielded no confession, but Miss Marple's mind spun. The glove, the note, the sharpened dagger. Someone had planned Hargrove's end with surgical care. She slipped to the ballroom, now sealed, but accessible via a side door. The rug bore a faint stain, the air still heavy with wax. Near the alcove, she found a smudge of ash, a cigarette, hastily stubbed. Not Hargrove's brand. His were Turkish, pungent. This was milder, like Clara's discarded butt at the station. She pocketed it, her thoughts on the girl's fear, her whispered hint about Tompkins and Hargrove's loan. Back in the drawing room, Craddock questioned Tompkins, summoned from his duties. You argued with Hargrove about a debt? The inspector said, his tone steel. Tompkins' hands clenched. Aye, he owed me wages, 3 months' worth. Said he'd pay when his ship came in. Never did. Craddock pressed, but Tompkins stood firm, his alibi the stables, alone. Miss Marple, watching, noted his knuckles, scarred as if from a recent scuffle. She approached Clara, who lingered by a window, her face pale. Clara, dear, you mentioned Tompkins' anger. Did you see him near the ballroom last night? Clara's eyes darted. I think so, near the terrace. He was smoking, muttering about Hargrove. I didn't dare linger. Miss Marple patted her arm, her thoughts on the ash. Lunch resumed, the blancmange now a melted ruin. Beatrice, desperate to lighten the mood, suggested a parlor game, charades, ironically, but simpler, no daggers involved. The players complied, their performances lackluster. Lydia mimed a botanist, her gestures precise, while Quill portrayed a surgeon, his cane a mock scalpel. Crane's attempt at a judge faltered, his papers scattering. Pettigrew refused to play, her beads a relentless rhythm. Miss Marple, declining to perform, watched Evelyn Marsh, the seamstress, whose needlework resumed with a steadiness that belied her cousin role. Mrs. Marsh, Miss Marple ventured, you stitched costumes for the game, yes? Did you see Hargrove yesterday? Evelyn's needle paused. Briefly, ma'am. He was in the sewing room asking for a red sash, said it matched his destiny. Odd man! As plates cleared, Miss Marple slipped to the terrace, where the stables loomed in the distance. A stable boy, polishing tack, confirmed Tompkins' presence last night, pacing like a caged fox, muttering about a painter who'd cheated him. Returning, she found Craddock grilling Quill about his vials. Medicinal, Inspector. Chamomile, salts, nothing lethal. Miss Marple interjected. Doctor, the Hunt's poison vial. Your supply? Quill's jaw tightened. A coincidence. Beatrice borrowed my props for flair. His cane tapped, a nervous tick. Craddock, sensing progress, gathered the group for a final sweep. We've a glove, a note, a sharpened dagger. Someone orchestrated this. Miss Marple, her voice soft, suggested a test. Inspector, check the alcove's wax smudge, candle wax or cigarette ash. A constable returned with a sample. Ash, mild-scented, matching Clara's butt. Miss Duval, Craddock said, you smoked last night? Clara blushed. I stepped out during the charade. Needed air. I saw no one. Her lie was fragile, and Miss Marple's gaze softened. Truth. Clara, saves more than it costs. As the clock struck 4,
Craddock arrested Tompkins on suspicion, his debt and stable-boy testimony enough for now. The group exhaled, a fragile relief settling. Miss Marple, unconvinced, pocketed her notebook. Tompkins was a thread, but not the weave's heart. The glove's lavender, Quill's vials, Clara's ash, Crane's note, pieces of a pattern still obscured. Beatrice, tearful, thanked her. "Jane, you've given us hope." Miss Marple's smile was faint. "Hope, yes, but truth waits." As she left for her cottage, the hall's shadows lengthened, the days unraveling a step towards justice, yet incomplete, a tapestry with knots still to be tied.
Chapter 5. The Final Riddle Solved. The morning light crept into St. Mary Mead with a tentative grace, as if wary of disturbing the village's uneasy quiet. Miss Jane Marple sat by her cottage window, the dawn painting her lace curtains with hues of pearl and saffron. Her knitting lay abandoned, the heathery scarf, a forgotten coil beside her notebook, its pages dense with the week's revelations. Hargrove's murder in the ballroom, the serpent-hilted dagger, the lavender-scented glove, the cigarette ash by the alcove, and Tompkins's arrest as a convenient but ill-fitting suspect. A letter had slipped into her pocket during yesterday's chaos at Gossington Hall, a crumpled note, not part of the game, its ink smudged but legible. "Agatha, the codicil is mine. Pay or I speak. L.H." Miss Marple's lips pursed. Hargrove's blackmail had woven a noose, but whose hand had tightened it? She donned a woolen coat, pinned her forget-me-not brooch, and sipped a final cup of tea, its bitterness mirroring her resolve. Today, the fatal riddle would end, not in play, but in truth. The village stirred as she stepped out, her basket swinging, her brogues soft on the cobbled path. Gossington Hall was closed to revelry, the fete cancelled under the weight of tragedy, but Inspector Craddock had summoned the players for a final reckoning at the vicarage, a neutral ground. The church spire loomed against a sky heavy with unshed rain, and Miss Marple paused at the lich gate, where Reverend Clement polished a brass plaque with absent-minded care. "A grim day, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low. "Clara shaken, says she saw something she shouldn't have. Won't tell me what." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "Fear silences truth, Reverend, but it speaks in other ways." She pressed on, her mind on Clara's cigarette ash, and whispered fears. The vicarage parlor was a cocoon of chintz and cedar, its warmth a stark contrast to the tension within. Craddock stood by the fireplace, his notebook open, his expression flinty. Beatrice, in subdued navy, twisted a shawl, her eyes red-rimmed. Clara Duval sat by a window, her hands knotted in her lap, her lavender dress pale as her face. Mrs. Agatha Pettigrew, in widow's black, clutched a prayer book, its pages unturned. Dr. Simon Quill leaned on his cane, his satchel absent, his gaze darting to the door. Ms. Lydia Finch, her notebook closed, adjusted her fern-embroidered scarf with precise fingers. Mr. Victor Crane, the solicitor, shuffled a stack of documents, his spectacles slipping. Mrs. Evelyn Marsh, the seamstress, stitched a hem, her presence a quiet thread in the room's tapestry. Miss Marple took a chair by the tea tray, her knitting a prop, her notebook hidden in her basket. Craddock cleared his throat. "Tompkins is in custody, but the case isn't closed. The dagger was sharpened deliberately, the glove planted, the note, L.H., midnight, allure. Miss Marple, you've been observant. Thoughts?" All eyes turned to her, and she set her needles aside, her voice soft but unyielding. "The game was a mirror, Inspector. Its clues reflected truths: greed, betrayal, revenge. Hargrove's death was no impulse. It was scripted like the charade, but with a darker pen." She produced the note from her pocket, its words a quiet accusation. "This, found yesterday, points to blackmail." Hargrove pressed Mrs. Pettigrew about a codicil. "Reginald's, I presume." Pettigrew's prayer book slipped, her face ashen. "That's private correspondence, stolen no doubt." Miss Marple's gaze held hers.
Not stolen, Mrs. Pettigrew. Dropped in haste, perhaps during the reenactment. She turned to Craddock. The codicil, Mr. Crane, you mentioned Hargrove's claim. Was it valid? Crane's papers trembled. I verified it last week. Reginald Pettigrew's will, amended in 20, named Leopold co-heir to a Devon estate, land worth thousands. Agatha contested it, claiming forgery, but the document held. Pettigrew's voice was a hiss. Lies. Reginald swore I'd inherit all. Leopold bribed the clerk. My husband's signature was coerced. Her vehemence cracked, and Clara flinched, her napkins shredding. Miss Marple shifted focus. Dr. Quill, your vial from the hunt. Almond-scented? Like cyanide. A prop, you said. Quill's cane stilled. Theatrics no more. Beatrice requested flair. I obliged with colored water. Lydia's snort was sharp. Water? I smelled it, doctor. Peach pit extract. Potent if misused. Quill's jaw tightened, but Miss Marple pressed on. And Clara, you smoked by the alcove that night. What did you see? Clara's eyes widened, tears brimming. I didn't mean to spy. Hargrove was there, whispering to someone. Couldn't see who. He sounded angry, said something about pay or I ruin you. I ran back inside. Craddock's pencil scratched, and Miss Marple noted Pettigrew's knuckles whitening on her book.
The parlor grew stifling, the tea cooling untouched. Miss Marple rose, her steps deliberate, and approached the vicarage's bookcase, where a volume on local history caught her eye. Flipping it open, she found a photograph. Reginald Pettigrew, stern-faced, beside a younger Hargrove, their resemblance unmistakable. Cousins, not nephew and uncle. Beatrice, she said, holding up the book. Reginald and Leopold were kin, weren't they? A shared inheritance. Contested? Beatrice nodded, her shawl slipping. Cousins, yes. Reginald's death left a tangle. Land in Devon, disputed for years. Agatha fought Leopold's claim tooth and nail. Pettigrew's voice broke. He had no right. Reginald promised me everything. Leopold's codicil was a fraud, meant to bleed me dry. Miss Marple's tone softened, but her words cut. Yet Hargrove had proof, and you knew it. The note suggests he demanded payment, silence for your secrets. She produced the glove, its lavender scent, faint but damning. This, found by Hargrove's body, is yours, Mrs. Pettigrew. You wore it that night. Pettigrew's face crumpled, her prayer book falling. I didn't kill him. Yes, I met him at the alcove. He demanded £10,000 to bury the codicil. I refused, but the blackout came, and I fled. Craddock leaned forward. Fled where? Pettigrew's voice was a whisper. To the terrace. I needed air. I heard a thud, thought he'd tripped. Miss Marple turned to Evelyn Marsh, whose needle paused mid-stitch. Mrs. Marsh, you made the charade's costumes. Did you see Hargrove with anyone that evening? Her eyes met hers, steady. Aye, mum. In the sewing-room before the charade. He was with Mr. Crane, arguing over papers. Something about a signature. Crane looked scared, kept saying, "It's legal, Leopold, don't push it." Crane's papers scattered as he stood. I told him to wait. The codicil needed verification. I wasn't hiding anything. Miss Marple's smile was faint. Leverage, indeed, but the dagger, sharpened before the charade. Who had access? Lydia spoke up, her voice clear. I saw Tompkins in the conservatory that afternoon, handling the props. He was muttering about Hargrove, called him a cheating leech. Craddock nodded. Tompkins admitted a debt dispute, but denies murder. His shears were sharp enough to hone a blade. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Yet the glove points elsewhere, and Clara's ash by the alcove, not the terrace. She paced to the window, her thoughts weaving. The game's clues, forgery, betrayal, poison, mirrored the player's truths. Hargrave's blackmail had stirred a nest of motives.
Pettigrew's lost fortune, Crane's complicity, Quill's dubious vials, Clara's fear, even Tompkins' bludge. But the dagger's precision, the blackout timing, suggested a mind colder than rage. She turned to Quill. "Doctor, you treated Reginald Pettigrew, didn't you, before his death?" Quill's cane froze. "Briefly. Heart trouble. Nothing suspicious." Miss Marple's voice was velvet. "Yet his will changed soon after. Did Hargrove pay you for influence?" Quill's face reddened. "Preposterous. I'm no mercenary." Beatrice, unable to bear the tension, suggested a break, tea in the garden. The group spilled onto the vicarage lawn, where roses nodded under gathering clouds. Miss Marple lingered with Clara, her tone gentle. "You saw more that night, didn't you, by the alcove?" Clara's tears fell. I lied about the terrace. I was there, smoking, when Hargrove met someone. I heard a woman's voice, Agatha's, I think, then a scuffle. I dropped my cigarette and ran." Miss Marple patted her hand. "Courage, Clara. You've helped more than you know." She approached Lydia, who was sketching a rose. "Miss Finch, your herbs, any could mask a sedative in tea?" Lydia's pen stilled. "Possibly. Belladonna, in small doses, but I saw nothing brewed that night." Craddock, overhearing, called the group back. "We're close," he said, holding the dagger's bag. "The blade was sharpened in the conservatory. Tompkins had access, but so did others." Miss Marple interjected. "Inspector, the note's ink, fresh, not aged, written that day, perhaps by someone other than Hargrove." She faced Pettigrew, her voice a quiet blade. "Mrs. Pettigrew, you met Hargrove to silence him, but someone else joined you, didn't you? Someone who knew the codicil's truth." Pettigrew's eyes widened, her prayer book trembling. "No, I was alone." But her voice broke, and Miss Marple pressed. "The glove was yours, but the dagger's thrust was steady, practiced. Dr. Quill, your surgical hand." Quill's cane clattered to the floor. "Absurd! I was nowhere near him." But Lydia's voice cut in. "I saw you, doctor, in the library before the charade, sharpening a blade. Said it was for your kit." Quill's face drained, and Miss Marple's gaze softened. "You treated Reginald, knew the codicil's weight. Hargrave's blackmail threatened your reputation, perhaps more." Craddock pounced. "Quill, explain." The doctor sagged, his voice a rasp. "Hargrove knew I'd advised Reginald on the codicil. Not coerced, advised. He threatened to expose me as a fraud unless I paid. I met him at the alcove to reason, but Agatha was there screaming about ruin. The blackout came, and I acted on impulse. The dagger was ready from the hunt. I didn't mean—" His confession trailed into silence, the room a frozen tableau. Pettigrew sobbed, her mask shattered. "I didn't know he'd kill him. I just wanted Leopold silent." Craddock signalled his men, and Quill was led away, his cane left behind like a fallen sceptre. Clara wept, Beatrice clutched her shawl, and Crane's papers fluttered to the floor. Lydia closed her notebook, her face grim. Evelyn Marsh stitched on, her needle a steady pulse. Miss Marple gathered her basket, her work done. "The game's riddles hid truth," she said to Craddock. "Blackmail wove the trap, and desperation sprung it." He nodded, his trilby tipped. "You have a knack, Miss Marple. We'd have pinned Tompkins without you." The vicarage emptied, the players dispersing into the rain that now fell in soft sheets. Beatrice walked Miss Marple to the gate, her voice trembling. "Jane, you've saved us from a deeper shadow. Will you come for tea tomorrow?" Miss Marple's smile was warm. "With scones, I hope." She returned to her cottage, the village settling into its rhythm. Church bells, children's laughter, the clop of a milk cart. Her notebook closed, the glove and cufflink tucked away, the riddle solved. Hargrove's greed, Quill's desperation, Pettigrew's fear. Threads now woven into justice. The sun broke through, golding the wet cobbles, and Miss Marple's heart lifted. St. Mary Mead endured, its secrets laid bare, its peace restored under her quiet watch.